Tuttle, president of Virginians for High-Speed Rail, and I serve on the board of directors and advisory council. We number some 40 strong with our sole staff member, executive director Danny Plogger. And today we welcome you and we thank you all for joining us to celebrate our 25th anniversary. This event has been over a year in the making, and special thanks go to our distinguished guests, our keynote speaker, our sponsors, and of course to all of you for staying with us through 2 postponements before going virtual. So here's hoping that any 4-legged furry colleagues or train-loving toddlers who may be with you today will enjoy being part of the celebration as well. At any time, please feel free to send in questions to our presenters using the chat box, or you can email them to Danny Plogger at danny@vhsr.com. And he'll work to get those questions answered through the course of the program. 12 months ago, few of us foresaw a year of worldwide pandemic and recession. But now, with 290,000 Americans having lost their lives to COVID-19, and millions more are struggling economically and socially. A year ago, none of us would have foreseen that ridership in Virginia's Amtrak regional trains would end fiscal 2020 42% down compared to the prior year. Nor would we have expected to have seen dramatic reductions in service for our Amtrak national trains. And as we look to the future, we wonder, how will the way we live, the way we do business, the way we travel change permanently? Will we, for example, still travel hundreds of miles for a meeting that can be held virtually? Will we still come to the office if we can work as effectively from home? Will we still choose to own 1.3 vehicles per licensed driver in Virginia, costing $8,000 to $9,000 annually? Will we still choose the same modes of intercity travel? And I'm sure everyone tuned in today wants to know what needs to be done now to make robust passenger rail ever more viable for the future. This event is intended to shed light on those kinds of questions. And it's also intended to be a celebration of Virginia for High-Speed Rail's silver anniversary, and a celebration of a decade of progress in the Commonwealth, expanding and improving passenger rail. At Virginians for High-Speed Rail, we're like tree farmers. We plant seedlings of vision, and season after season, we tend the young trees through education and advocacy. And we understand that it takes many years for seedlings, for our vision to grow to maturity. So you can flip to the next slide. And since Virginians for High-Speed Rail was founded in 1994 as a partnership then of the Richmond Chamber of Commerce, Future of Hampton Roads, and the Hampton Roads Chamber, we've seen many of those seedlings grow to bear fruit. We've witnessed extending the federally designated Southeast high-speed rail corridor from Richmond to Hampton Roads, creating a federally recognized Virginia-North Carolina high-speed rail compact, preventing and eliminating one of our Newport News Amtrak trains, preventing its elimination, and creating the Virginia Rail Enhancement Fund and the Virginia Rail Advisory Board, launching and expanding the Lynchburg and Richmond regionals, extending those trains to Roanoke and Norfolk, and creating IPROC, the Virginia Intercity Rail Operating and Capital Fund, and securing dedicated funding for that fund. In 2020 was a year primed to begin a new era in passenger rail. In December 2019, Governor Ralph Northam, Secretary Valentine, and Director Mitchell announced the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative. This historic announcement meant that for the first time in decades, Virginia would purchase and own railroad right-of-way and infrastructure, and that the state would also invest over $3 billion to expand and improve rail capacity. All told, the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative and partner investments would allow the Commonwealth to expand Amtrak service by 53% and increase Virginia Railway Express service by 39%. During the 2020 General Assembly session, the Governor's Transportation Omnibus Act passed, and rolling the Rail Enhancement Fund and IPROC into a new reorganized Transportation Trust Fund with 7.5% of all transportation funding dedicated to the new Commonwealth Rail Fund. Before the pandemic, this was anticipated to increase rail funding by 22% over the biennium. The Transportation Omnibus Act also created the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, something advocated by our organization for more than 2 decades. Lastly, we helped secure legislative support for a Virginia DPRT feasibility study on a new Commonwealth corridor designed to return east-west passenger rail service in Virginia for the first time in nearly 4 decades. In sum, since our founding, we've seen Amtrak service in the Commonwealth expand 69%, ridership increase 71%, and 83% of all Virginians living within 20 miles of an Amtrak station. But what does the future hold? Before proceeding, I'd like to thank the sponsors who have made today's event possible. Thank you to our silver sponsors, Southern Environmental Law Center and Sandy Duckworth. Thank you to our gold sponsors, JVG Smith, Siemens, Jim and Bobby Ukrop, Progress Rail and Caterpillar, and the Virginia Rail Policy Institute. And special thanks to our presenting scholar or sponsor, Dominion Energy. Dan Weekly, Dominion's Vice President for Energy Innovation and Innovation Policy and Implementation, is with us today. Dan serves as one of our directors, and we've asked him to say a few words about Dominion's energy innovation and community involvement, and to introduce a brief video. Dan.
At Dominion Energy, we're building a clean and sustainable energy future by embracing change and transforming everything we do for the benefit of our customers, our communities, our employees, and the planet. We're cutting greenhouse gas emissions, and we've set a bold new target: net zero carbon and methane emissions by 2050. We're helping our customers shrink their carbon and methane footprint and cleaning up other parts of the economy by turning waste into renewable energy and upgrading our grid to make it stronger and greener. We're adding more solar, along with the largest offshore wind farm in the Americas. We're building more storage to capture power from clean energy sources, supplying cleaner natural gas to replace coal and oil, and extending the life of our zero-carbon nuclear power plants so we can meet people's need for energy that's clean, safe, reliable, affordable, and sustainable. We know strong companies need a strong society, so we're committed to helping others by supporting programs that provide food, housing, education, and more. We're helping employees with education and training so they can build a brighter future for themselves and their families. We have an aggressive diversity recruitment strategy, which includes increasing the percentage of new hires who are diverse. We know companies that are diverse are more successful. Investing in energy, investing in people. Dominion Energy, where actions speak louder.
Wonderful, and thank you, Dan, for for bringing that message to us from Dominion. We appreciate Dominion and their generous support of this organization and of the celebration today. The core function of Virginians for High-Speed Rail is to educate the public and decision makers. Dan, are you there now? Missed you earlier, so.
Yep, I'm sorry. I had to step away just for a second. How are you, Jack?
Okay, we got the video first rather than your introduction first, but we'd love to hear a word from you.
Well, thanks. And again, I apologize for that. My phone rang in the other room. I didn't realize it was so close. So I just want to thank everyone for being today, and appreciate the efforts. And as you've heard from Dominion, that in the past, we're very focused on decarbonization efforts. And as a big part of that is transportation. So we look forward to the panel discussions today and talking about moving forward. But what we're really interested in is helping with our decarbonization efforts in the communities that we're proud to serve. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dan. We appreciate you making time to be with us today. As I was saying, as we were moving on, was that the core function of Virginians for High-Speed Rail is to educate the public and decision makers with periodic Virginia passenger rail reports. And before turning to our executive director and to Trip Pollard for that report, we'd like to give Danny Plogger something before we do that. Danny, earlier today, the board formally adopted this resolution, and I've got it here just so everybody can see it. A resolution commending you, Danny, and thanking you for your extraordinary service to this organization and to its cause as our executive director since 2007. And with the resolution, the members of the board have made personal contributions to VHSR over the past few months that have enabled us to award you a bonus for 2020 that's very well deserved, and also to let you know that we truly mean every word of thanks and commendation. So Danny, we are exceedingly proud of you, and we appreciate you so much. And now, Danny, we turn to you together with Trip Pollard, who's senior attorney and leader of the Southern Environmental Law Center's Land and Community Program. And together they'll provide an overview of their upcoming report entitled Virginia's Regional Trains Passenger Rail Post-Pandemic, and also give us a look at the results of a recent passenger rail survey. So Danny and Trip.
Thank you, Jack. And thank you everyone for being on board, and thank you for that resolution. Trip and I began this work on looking at what passenger rail and where passenger rail goes following the pandemic earlier this year when we saw the ridership begin to decline. So Clay, next slide. Next slide.
I apologize as these things go. PowerPoint has stopped working.
Oh.
One moment.
All right. There we go. And thank you all. We are, as is the case with 2020, we are learning to live with the new adventures of these type of events and all the technical difficulties that come with them. There we go. Excellent. So this is the front page of the report. It will be available next week. Next slide. When looking at, the first thing we did was kind of look back at the last decade of progress. And if you look at ridership on Virginia's Amtrak regional trains over the last decade, ridership has grown 107%. And we were on pace this year for breaking over 1 million passengers for the first time on our regionals before the pandemic hit. Next slide. And our ridership, as you can see, for the first few months of the fiscal year in the blue compared to the red, our ridership was up 21%. And that's thanks to the leadership at DRPT and Amtrak and Secretary Valentine for promoting our trains and investing in them. But as soon as the pandemic hit, we saw a drop off, rightly so. And we ended the fiscal year nearly 42% down. And so Tripp and I started asking the question of what do we need to do to make Virginians feel comfortable, safe, comfortable taking the train again for intercity trips. Next slide. And so we posed a survey to over 600, I think nearly 650 Virginians, asking them a handful of questions about what would make them feel safe. So next slide. 82% of them said that wearing a mask, or 88% said mandating a mask on our trains and at our stations would make them feel more comfortable taking a train. Next slide. 82% said limiting capacity on our trains to 50% until infections decline, said they would be more comfortable. Next slide. 82% also said that disinfecting the train as often as possible, especially at major intermediary stops, would make them feel comfortable. Next stop, our next slide, our next, yep, sorry. 66% said that decreasing the ticket prices or offering special discounts would make them more inclined to take the train. And next, and 37% said adding sleeper cars onto our train so that they could separate themselves, or give them the option of separating themselves, especially if they have a pre-existing condition, would make them feel more comfortable using Amtrak for intercity trips. So next slide. So we took all this information together and we asked them, how likely are you to take a train over the next year? And 49% said they are very likely. And another 44% said maybe, implementing some of those short-term measures. And so I think that's the real opportunity, is how do we convince that other 44% to potentially take a train if they're planning an intercity trip. So next slide. Click again. And so our short-term measures in the report, obviously mask mandate, decreased seat capacity, increased sanitation, reduced fares, and returning daily service to our long distance trains, and adding sleeping cars where available on our regionals. A lot of which Amtrak is already doing. To their credit, they've done a fantastic job on a lot of these different measures. It would make people feel more comfortable using Amtrak for intercity trips. Next. And then we also outlined some longer term goals with the idea that we have to keep our eye on the ball in regards to planning the future. So I'll leave that over to Tripp.
Thanks, Danny. Yes, 2020 definitely has been a year of many challenges, but there is light at the end of the tunnel on the pandemic. So in addition to the short-term measures that Danny mentioned and were explored in that survey, we need to be sure to keep our eye on the bigger picture and long-term steps that are needed. The report we're releasing next week about passenger rail post-pandemic does touch on some of the potential projects that can help rebuild rail ridership, strengthen our economy, and curb climate pollution and other pollution and emissions from transportation sources. So there are multiple benefits that we need to be sure we are pursuing and keeping our eye on that longer term vision. The transformation of rail is well underway. One of the most important components is the Transforming Rail in Virginia program, unveiled almost exactly a year ago. It's a particularly important number of elements won't go into now. I know some of our other speakers will be hearing from more later, but this is a critical $3.7 billion initiative that includes a number of key right-of-way and infrastructure purchases by the Commonwealth, doubling the capacity of existing Long Bridge, which is such a huge choke point for freight and passenger rail. And as Jack mentioned at the beginning, these improvements will allow a tremendous increase in both intercity Amtrak service and VRE. And it is just it's been a core, number of elements of this plan have been a core initiative and ask of many advocates for many years. So very pleased to see this move forward and need to continue to do all we can to make it a reality and have that be at the top of our list. In addition, was mentioned the Commonwealth Corridor. That's a proposed east-west passenger rail route connecting Southwest Virginia through Charlottesville to Richmond and Hampton Roads. It was raised in a 2013 report from VHSR and Southern Environmental Law Center, and further developed in a report Danny and I actually wrote last year, outlining the difficulty today in getting from one side of Virginia to the other by rail and the tremendous multiple benefits of restoring such connections. Resolution passed in the 2020 General Assembly session that we worked on requesting VDRPT to study this corridor, and that study is underway and needs to maintain as a top priority. I won't touch on all of these just in the interest of time, but the Piedmont corridor, the Roanoke, Lynchburg to DC regional train has been one of the most successful regional trains in Amtrak's entire network nationwide. Since 2014, a second daily round trip on this corridor has been planned and funds have been set aside. This service has been tied up for a number of reasons, but it needs to be implemented, and Norfolk Southern and the state need to ensure it begins as soon as possible. And also, state continue to look at further extensions of this train beyond Roanoke. In addition to these efforts, there are a number of others. One, in the interest of time, will not only highlight a couple, but our report will have a more comprehensive list. One of them is returning all Amtrak national trains to run through Virginia to daily service and increasing the Cardinal from 3 times a week to daily service. Also looking at further environmental impact statement and improving passenger rail between Richmond and Hampton Roads, partnering with North Carolina on the Richmond to Raleigh service, and investing in dual mode engines that can run on diesel or electricity, and then ultimately looking and advancing electrifying rail in Virginia as soon as possible. Next slide. One more. There we go. In addition to these projects and investments, a number of policy changes are also needed to help rebuild ridership and realize our vision for expanded passenger rail. Perhaps most important is protecting funding dedicated to passenger rail and securing additional funds from state, federal, and local funding. We may hopefully see an increase in federal rail money, for example, and we want Virginia to be well positioned to take advantage of that and secure as much assistance for these projects as part of our rail vision as possible. Also want to ensure federal funding for Amtrak is increased overall, since our regional trains can't operate without successful Amtrak, especially the Northeast Corridor service. And we want to make sure that no investment is made in major new or expanded highway projects without ensuring that there's adequate analysis of viable rail alternatives. These are just some of the projects and policies that we need to rebuild ridership and advance passenger rail in the next decade, taking us closer and farther along this vision to true rail renaissance. And now we'll turn it back to Danny.
Excellent. Next slide real quick. And as we said, the report will be released next week. It'll be available at vhsr.com /what's next. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jack.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Trip. We look forward to reading the full report when it comes out next week. So thank you for putting all that together for us. It certainly is timely. And now we come to what is the favorite part of this annual event, and that is presentation of our awards. And this afternoon, I'll present awards to 3 exceptional people, 3 leaders who have made a tremendous contribution to advance passenger rail. The first award is the W. Thomas Rice Rail Renaissance Award. And this award is named for Thomas Rice, a native of Virginia, was first employed by the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1934, and he served in World War II, ultimately attaining the rank of Major General in the Army Reserve. After the war, he joined the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad, becoming its president in 1955. And subsequently, Mr. Rice served as president of the Atlantic Coast Line Railroad and then as chairman and CEO of Seaboard Coastline Railroad upon its merger with Atlantic Coast in 1970. In 1978, he became chairman emeritus of Seaboard Coastline Industries and its successor, CSX, until his passing in May of 2006. And as you see on your screen, the Rice Rail Renaissance Award is presented for profound and lasting leadership in rail transportation development. And I'm proud to present it to Virginia's Department of Rail and Public Transportation Director, Jennifer Mitchell, for her exceptional leadership at VDRPT over the last 7 years. So Director Mitchell, we are honored to hear from you now.
Oh, thank you so much, Danny, Jack, everybody on the Virginians for High-Speed Rail board. It is truly humbling and an honor to receive this award. I would say that it has been an honor for me to be able to serve as director of DRPT for the last 7 years. It has been an incredible ride, and we have, I feel like we're just beginning in some ways when you look at sort of where we're headed right now. None of this, though, would be possible without the advocacy that we have from this group. All of you and the work that you all have put into it for decades has gotten us to where we are today. And we are making big strides in moving forward. I do want to say, though, that this, while I'm thrilled to have my name associated with this award, it really would not be possible without a number of other people. And I certainly want to recognize Secretary Valentine and the leadership that she has put into this personally on passenger rail throughout the Commonwealth, really since she was in the House of Delegates before even being as Secretary of Transportation. But all of the staff that we have at DRPT, we have an amazing team. Mike McLaughlin, our Chief of Rail, Steve Pittard, our CFO, Jeremy Latimer, our Manager of Rail Programs, and all of the staff that we have are truly incredible and work so hard to execute the vision that we've set. So I also want to recognize, of course, Deputy Secretary Nick Donahue, Deputy Secretary John Lawson. They have also been truly instrumental in being able to get the program where it is today, and also to champion the resources that we've been able to establish for passenger rail. So it's very exciting. I am thrilled about where we are right now in establishing the new Virginians Passenger Rail Authority. We will be mobilizing that over the next year. And this is going to be, I think, a new chapter for passenger rail in the state going forward. In addition to that, with our groundbreaking partnership with CSX and our ability to double our Amtrak service, we truly do appreciate the partnership we have with Amtrak as well. VRE too is a huge organization for us and so important to moving traffic in Northern Virginia. And VRE staff and the board are truly great to work with. So again, I thank you so much for this award. I really do appreciate it. I'm thrilled to be here today, and I look forward to participating in the rest of the program. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. We appreciate you so much and everything that you have done and will continue to do. So congratulations.
Thanks.
And we have another award, and our next award, by tradition, this organization does not present awards to its own directors. Rather, it honors outstanding service by directors by naming awards after them. And the next award we have honors and is in the name of Jose Covington and Meredith Richards. It's the Covington Richards Legislative Achievement Award. The award's named for Jose Covington, founder and CEO of Covington Travel, and the first president of our organization. And she was the one who led in getting this set up and transitioning it to become an independent nonprofit in 2000. And also named for Meredith Richards, former Charlottesville City Council member and our longest serving president. And her grassroots efforts over many years resulted in the successful Lynchburg Regional Train in 2009. So the Covington Richards Award is presented for transformative leadership in securing significant legislative victories to advance rail transportation. And I have the honor to present that award to Secretary of Transportation, Shannon Valentine, for her lifetime of rail advocacy, her leadership in securing passage of the Transportation Omnibus, and for making Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative a reality. So Secretary Valentine, we look forward to hearing from you, and we are particularly interested in hearing the status of transforming rail in Virginia. So Secretary Valentine.
Hello, can you hear me, Mr. Tuttle?
Yes, we can. Very well.
So it's so great to be with you. Great to be with you, Danny. I really appreciated your presentation with Trip Pollard, and to have the opportunity to receive an award named for Jose Covington and Meredith Richards, who have whose advocacy in rail transportation is really unparalleled. So that just makes me feel so honored and privileged, because the truth is, I would not be here today if it weren't for those individuals, and truthfully, so many of you. I just want to offer my congratulations to Jennifer Mitchell, the director of the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. She is an incredible leader. One day, Jennifer, we're going to laugh about how much time we get to spend together. We were on the phone very late last night, but how special it is for me that I am able to work with you through such a transformative time. And my deputies, Nick Donahue and John Lawson, who I believe are the best in government, and the entire team at the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Just so many people in whose footsteps, I admire and follow, to be quite honest. All of you have mentioned the fact that this is not a normal time. 2020 has certainly been a very interesting year. I do want to assure you that across the entire Transportation Secretariat, from the very beginning of this pandemic, we have been focused. Our highest priority has been the health and safety of our customers, our employees, our partners, and we have recognized our role in managing managing this pandemic, in making sure we are transporting critical goods and connecting people to essential work, food, medicine, and PPE. It has been a true logistical collaboration, from the Port of Virginia to trucking, to barges, to transit, to rail, aviation, all working together to be the platform for Virginia's recovery through all of this. I do, as we are managing this, I do know that we are also having to contend with the financial implications of this pandemic. And so during the special session, we worked with Governor Northam and our General Assembly to introduce a budget amendment that provides flexibility to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And recognizing that, in fact, the CTB just signed off on the 6-year improvement plan this past week, we are facing an $870 million reduction in transportation dollars through FY22. That is a very significant reduction. However, with this flexibility that was provided in this budget amendment, we in Virginia, unlike other states that are looking to cancel projects, delay them, lay off workers, we have been completely focused on what we can do to maintain our pipeline of projects, maintain our initiatives, as Jack Tuttle described as seedlings, maintaining that, all of those, securing our workforce, and remaining Virginia's platform for economic recovery and growth. And so with that, we are actually able to maintain our 6-year improvement plan, our major initiatives on time and on budget as we move forward. I do not believe we would be in this position without the passage of the omnibus bill in 2020, which some of you have acknowledged today. That bill helped us restructure transportation funding. It created the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, which often goes unnoticed in transportation, but really for the first time, it is a financial commitment to funding all modes of transportation. Danny and Tripp will know this, that oftentimes rail transit are funded with those sources like bonds that expire or an act of Congress, literally. This is a way where all modes are stabilized. We rise and fall together, and well, hopefully just rise. And it just provides that kind of stability and predictability as we move forward together. The final major piece of this was putting in place the structure to implement our transforming rail in Virginia, which is very, very important. As you know, I think it was you, Tripp, who acknowledged it was nearly a year ago that Governor Northam, we were all up in Northern Virginia, and we announced this $3.7 billion initiative to an agreement with CSX and with our partners, Amtrak and VRE, to double Amtrak capacity along the 95 corridor and increase VRE service by about 75% when fully implemented, including evening and weekend service. But it's interesting to think about where we are, because 10 years ago on your graph that Danny and Tripp showed this morning, that your ridership numbers on Virginia's regional trains started in 2009. It started with that little train in Lynchburg, Virginia. I remember when in 2008, Amtrak was designating the operating responsibility to the states for regional trains. We were in a recession. We were doing a statewide rail plan. Matthew Tucker was the director of DRPT at the time. And Amtrak had just finished a study that indicated that the corridor between Lynchburg and Washington, D.C. was the most underserved in Virginia. And with that information, I set up a meeting with Governor Kane and Pierce Homer, and I asked Delegate David Toscano to join me. I had a letter that had been signed by 3 Republican delegates, William Fralin, Ed Scott, and Rob Bell. So it was a bipartisan request that we launch a train anchored in Lynchburg, Virginia along the 95 corridor. I firmly believe that never would have happened had it not been for Meredith Richards and her creation of the Piedmont Rail Coalition and just the support she had created for this regional train. And that launched on October 1st, 2009. Meredith was there, Wick Moorman was there, Tripp and Danny, and it was just a moment. But that was the first time that Virginia had invested in passenger rail service, $17.5 million to run a pilot for 3 years. The agreement was we had to have 51,000 riders to maintain the pilot. The truth was we did not have 51,000 riders that first year. We had 126,000 riders. And from that time, a little more than 10 years ago, that ridership has gone from 126,000 up to 984,000. As Danny pointed out, nearly 1 million riders. 2019 had our best ridership. We had the best December in 2019 we ever had, and we were on our way to have the best January in 2020. However, through all of this, we never lost sight of the fact that what we are doing is not solving a problem for next year. We're trying to create generational solutions with the investments that we have. And that is the perspective we are bringing to this transforming rail. There are many moving parts, and we're pulling them all together. Jennifer Mitchell and many of us working on this. The final environmental study was completed in September. The Long Bridge Act of 2020, the language that would allow the Commonwealth and the District of Columbia to construct a rail bridge on National Park Service land has passed the House. Senators Warner and Kane have introduced legislation in the Senate. There's language moving forward. And so we're very, very hopeful that that legislative authority will be granted. And so again, it's an important piece. We have submitted the initial filing to the Surface Transportation Board. We have launched the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. They had their first meeting in November. They have a second meeting coming up in December 14th. We received on December 3rd the notice that VRE's funding agreement for this initiative was passed by the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and the PRTC, Potomac and Rappahannock Transportation Commissions in Northern Virginia on December 3rd for their about approximately $200 million commitment to the project. We are in the final weeks of negotiations with Amtrak for their $944,000 commitment to the project, $944 million commitment to the project, excuse me. So we're working with them and in the final weeks of finalizing the definitive agreements with CSX. So as you can see, there have been many moving parts, many perspectives to bring to the table going through a pandemic, and where there has been tremendous uncertainty around so much from ridership to funding, keeping this all together. So what I can report to you today, everyone is still at the table, all the parts are moving forward, and our hope is to be able to come back to you and let you know when that has all been completed, which would be a truly great day in Virginia. And for us, it's the basic platform. It's the initial scope of what needs to happen to transform rail in Virginia. So I will just say that to be where we are would not have been possible without this organization, without the commitment of those within this organization, the commitment to rail. But on the days when it gets really tough, I just think, look where we have come in really a relatively short time. I would just like to close by saying thank you. I recognize how important our partnership is. And I'd like to close with two quotes from the women whose name signifies this particular award. And the first I will say comes from Meredith Richards. Even from afar, I feel as though she is a friend. And she said back in 2010, the future is ours to create. And I really believe that's how she lives her life, and certainly inspires all of us. And Jose Covington, when she was named Richmond Person of the Year, I just loved her entrepreneurial and business spirit. And there was a quote in the paper as she was trying to find the funding to launch her agency. And she wrote to her grandmother back in Europe, and she wrote, "Need money, send me lots." And with the spirit of both of these women, I just thank you again and wish you all the best, and wish us all the best as we continue to move forward on your vision to create fast, frequent, reliable rail service along the entire East Coast. Thank you.
Much, Secretary Valentine. Thanks so much, Secretary Valentine. I've switched seats we won't go into why, but I've switched seats, and we appreciate in this organization the leadership we've got now in the Commonwealth of Virginia and in transportation, and it's just an exciting time. So thank you, and congratulations on your well-deserved reward, named for two real wonderful women.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have one more award to present, and our final award today on behalf of the board and staff of Virginians for High-Speed Rail is the Dick L. Beatles and James E. Ukrop Lifetime Achievement Award. And this award is named for Richard L. Dick Beatles, who's previously served as president of the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad, and James E. Jim Ukrop, who previously served as the CEO of Ukrop Supermarkets and First Market Bank, as well as the president of the Greater Richmond Chamber of Commerce. So Dick and Jim, together, they were driven by a vision to connect Richmond and Virginia with improved intercity and high-speed rail. Together, they created Virginians for High-Speed Rail. And over the last 2+ decades, their vision and their advocacy has inspired Virginia to become a national leader in the future of passenger rail transportation. So the Beatles Ukrop Award is presented for extraordinary lifetime achievement in rail transportation development. And I'm excited to present the Beatles Ukrop Award to Mr. Wick Moorman. Mr. Moorman is an esteemed American businessman and railroader. He currently consults with Amtrak, where he served until recently without compensation as its president and CEO. And prior to Amtrak, Mr. Moorman served in positions of chairman, president, and CEO of Norfolk Southern Railway until retiring from Norfolk Southern in 2015. While there, Wick Moorman was instrumental in extending Virginia's Amtrak regional trains to Lynchburg, to Norfolk, and to Roanoke. And currently, Mr. Moorman is helping stand up, and he serves on the new Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, an idea first advanced by Dick Beatles over 2 decades ago. So Wick, I'm pleased to present you this award, the Beatles Ukrop Lifetime Achievement Award. We look forward to your remarks, and also reminding our audience that you can send in your questions to Mr. Moorman or any of our guests today, and hopefully we'll have some time to get to them. So now, Mr. Moorman.
Well, thank you so much, Jack. By the way, I love that picture of me because they took it for a periodical. I was standing at the end of a dilapidated platform up at Washington Station, looking up, and they put the light on me, and it looked like I was happy and the angels were talking to me. I like to see that every chance I get. Thanks very much, everyone. Let me say first and foremost, I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm particularly honored not only that it's the 25th anniversary meeting, but honored to have received this award because Jim Ukrop and Dick Beatles obviously drove so much of what's happening in Virginia today in terms of rail. And I'm very, very pleased to accept the award. You can see my study behind me, incidentally. No pets. I think the novelty of Zoom has worn off for a lot of us, and I am going to try and work through this. It's the first time I've spoken to a larger group on Zoom. There's some pluses to Zoom. I feel no guilt at all about not wearing a tie, although I did go get a haircut. And while I can't hear the laughter in the audience when I say something that I think is funny, I also can't see when you doze off or decide to leave. So I guess all in, it cuts about the same. I'd like to talk about a couple of things today. First, and really something I do know something about, a little bit about the current state of affairs at Amtrak. Amtrak's such an important partner to Virginia that I think it's useful for all of you to know, at least in my perspective, how things are going on, how things are going up there. And I also am going to indulge myself and go off on a little bit of a rant about something that annoys me enormously every time I read it. And that is the continuing myths and misconceptions about how Amtrak keeps score in terms of its cost and its accounting. I'll then turn to a little bit for a couple of minutes to some of the questions that Jack posed at the beginning and give you what I think are possible outcomes for the post-COVID world. I will tell you, as I've told millions of people in the past, that I have an exceptionally cloudy crystal ball, but I always say that I make up for it with exceptionally keen hindsight. So we'll see how good I am. And if I've been wrong, you'll hear a different story from me in a couple of years. So let's turn to Amtrak. And let me put COVID aside for a minute and tell you that, in my opinion, Amtrak is a good news story. And why do I say that? I say that because today, Amtrak is a well-run company. It's managed by experienced professionals. And that, quite frankly, is not something I could have told you when I first got up there in 2016. Maybe briefly tell you why I went. I had stepped down as CEO of Norfolk Southern and then stepped down as chairman of the board. We'd moved to Charlottesville, where we live now, and we were doing very well. My wife was delighted that I was retired. And then I was approached by the Amtrak board chair, a terrific guy named Tony Kosha, who started to talk to me about this. And eventually, to the amazement, quite frankly, of my friends and the utter disgust and dismay of my wife, I agreed to take on the role. As was mentioned, I actually started off at $1 a year and eventually had to give that up because it turned out it compromised another part of my pension, which was more than $1. So I gave that up. And I gave a pledge to my wife that it was 6 months, categorically 6 months, no longer. So I spent about 15 months up there. The last 5, I guess, as co-CEO with Richard Anderson. And I'll talk a little bit about Richard as we go ahead. So when I went up there, I used to give talks internally and externally that Amtrak is and was in fact chartered to be under DC law a for-profit corporation. And while the for-profit doesn't work in the business model, in the Amtrak business model, or for that matter, in almost any model of transportation when costs are fully loaded, certainly not in rail around the world, that didn't mean that it couldn't be a well-run corporation. And that was my goal going in. I had 2 assignments from the board. First was to start to fix things. And the second was to help find a successor. And I should also tell you, answer the question, why on earth did I go to Amtrak? Well, three basic reasons. The first, I think Amtrak's important. In fact, the last talk I gave to anyone was to an industry group a couple of years ago about why Amtrak should be important to everyone, to the hosts as well as the public. It was received, I think, with some skepticism, but it is important. And I thought it was a way for me to do some public service and try to do something good without going through the process of having to answer the questions about everyone I'd met in the last 25 years and every place I'd been. So that's the noble reason. The second was that when it became known that the CEO position at Amtrak was going to become available, there were a number of people in the industry that said I would be really an ideal candidate. And I started to agree with that, which is not so noble, but I thought, yeah, I'm a good fit. And the third, and probably the most important thing to remember about me, is I am a trained guy. I've had a wonderful career, but I've been fascinated by the railroad since I can remember, since literally I was 2, I guess. And I really thought that it would be an interesting and fun job. And that certainly turned out to be the case. I enjoyed it immensely. So I signed up for 6 months, went up there in September of 2016. And quite frankly, it was something of a mess up there. And I can list all kinds of reasons why. I'll give you an example. I will say first and foremost, though, there were some really good people up there. Some of them were a better fit in other jobs, and we did that. And then some of them needed to go, and they left. But for the most part, excellent people, a lot of whom are still up there today. But the safety program was not good, and it was trending in the wrong direction because Amtrak had implemented a somewhat poorly conceived safety initiative a couple of years before. There were literally millions of dollars being spent on new IT systems. The projects were being poorly managed, and the results, I mean, even when they were implemented, the benefits were uncertain. The engineering program, particularly on the maintenance of the corridor, was not good, not well executed. And this really meant that we weren't making the improvements up there we should have been, and it caused considerable dismay on the part of the states and the commuter agencies who under the PREA Act were going to be and had started to be responsible for paying their share of corridor maintenance. And we had to improve that. They made lots of decisions in terms of customer facing things that just really didn't make much sense. The stations were run down. The interiors of the car were kind of old and dingy. They had, for example, cut the carpet cleaning in the cars, including the cars on the regional, to once a year. And it didn't save a lot of money. But anyway, this is a long list. And so there was lots to do. I didn't have much time to figure this out, so I enlisted the help of some colleagues who are also friends who had recently retired from NS to go in and do deep dives on these specific issues. One in particular I'll mention, I don't know if she's listening today, but Deb Butler, who had retired as our Executive Vice President of Planning, Strategic Planning, and our Chief Information Officer, came in to help me get to the bottom of the things around information technology. And I mention her specifically because she's now on the BPRA board, which I also have the privilege of serving on. So anyway, long story, lots of examples. I'll sum it up by saying 2 things I've told a lot of people. I wondered when I went in how long it would take me to figure out what was going on and try to come up with a plan. And it became clear within a couple of weeks that not only was there low-hanging fruit in terms of those opportunities, there was some fruit rotting on the ground that needed to be taken care of. And along with that, I would say that almost every day I was there for the first 4 or 5 months, I'd be in a meeting and I'd hear about something that was going on. And I'd say, what? So a lot of work to do. What a difference today. We got some stuff started. And as I mentioned, one of my jobs was to recruit a successor who'd be there for the longer term. And we were fortunate beyond anything I would have thought possible in recruiting Richard Anderson. Richard, whom as I'm sure some of you know, had retired from Delta Airlines about the same time I retired from NS. He had taken Delta from bankruptcy to the most admired domestic carrier, and he was the ideal guy to come into Amtrak in many respects. Richard is truly a change agent. He's very high energy. He's relentless. He's impatient. And to use a phrase that I used a lot up there, He knows what good looks like. The second thing is that he was totally focused on customer-facing issues, particularly in terms of things that have been neglected, things like the carpet, things like bathrooms in the stations and on the trains, just the total environment. I can tell you, when I walked around Washington Union Station with him and saw how he compared it to Terminal 5 in Atlanta, it was an education for me. And then third, and this was really important, I'm a railroad guy. I knew how to run the railroad or what a well-run railroad looks like. But what I didn't understand was the retail passenger marketing environment. And that's what airlines are. They're retail passenger marketing companies on a scale far greater than Amtrak. So he knew that environment, and not only that, he knew the people to bring in to help professionalize that at Amtrak and bring a whole new level of sophistication to pricing and marketing. Now, he and Bill Flynn, the new CEO up there, who also came out of the airline industry, have been castigated and sometimes sneered at by certain people as being airline people. But I will tell you, it is what Amtrak needed and still needs. And they also have brought the right degree of management professionalism in. So I could go on about that. I would tell you, Richard will be the first to admit that he's not perfect. He can be a little impatient, but the difference in Amtrak now and 2016 is just striking. And really with Bill Flynn in there as CEO, I'm very confident that all of that improvement will continue. And I will say, by the way, about Bill, that while he spent most of his career in the airline business, he spent some summers working on a track game when he was a youth. His father worked for a railroad. And he later spent some time at CSX. And now I'm a former track guy myself. So that first thing is a great recommendation. But as a former NS employee, I would say the CS experience is good, but not as good as it could be. So Amtrak is positioned to succeed. Let me talk now, by way of a short rant, about this whole issue around Amtrak's accounting and finances, because any of you who read either Railway Age editorials or Trains Magazine, they are continuing sources of erroneous speculation and misconception about Amtrak's accounting. And this is driven, and I say this with all the love in the world for them, because I like to ride trains too, almost exclusively by the advocates for the long distance network. And it popped up again in the most recent issue of Trains Magazine, where there's an article that purports to show that the idea of cutting back long distance service temporarily because it's bleeding money right now is in fact driven by ideology rather than economics, and it's some kind of attempt to kill off the long distance network. There is an editorial, I think it's out already, coming from Tony Kosha, the Amtrak's board chair, in Railway Age, which answers that very eloquently. I will also say it is not Amtrak's intention to leave any long distance train that was daily before in a tri-weekly mode. They want to bring them all back. They understand their importance in a lot of ways. But as I say, right now, they are losing so much money that they're jeopardizing some other important Amtrak initiatives for the long term. So what else goes on? Well, people espouse that somehow or another Amtrak's cost system doesn't work, and that really long distance trains don't lose any money, and maybe they're really money makers. That's not true. Amtrak uses what network accounting principles. That they're standard for any large business which has distributed network assets on which a lot of businesses ride. Examples are not only the railroads, but the airlines and the telecom companies, the same concept. And the essence of all these systems that you allocate all of the costs in the businesses, including all of the network costs to the various businesses. And the costs are allocated in three basic ways. Direct variable costs, which Amtrak calls frequency variable costs. The expense of actually running the train, right? Wages for crew, onboard services, fuel costs, the payments to the host railroad, an average cost per each locomotive and car, anything that can be assigned to the train on that given day. Then there are what Amtrak calls the route variable costs, which are still tied just purely to the operation, but are harder to distribute on a daily basis. A couple of examples: a cost center. Another example, all the overhead at the car and locomotive shops. And then finally, there are the fixed costs, although in business you're taught there's no really such thing as a fixed cost because all costs can get cut eventually. But think G&A, think a law department, the accounting department, whatever. And the whole trick of this is to get the allocations right, to make sure that the right costs are going to the right business and even to the right train, not daily, but the right train operation for a year. Amtrak's system was not designed by Amtrak. It was designed by an independent group, consulting group, the Volpe Center, under contract to the FRA. It is a very complex system. In fact, the argument against it is not that it's wrong. It really grinds down into the details. And it goes to great lengths to assume that the costs are calculated appropriately, consolidated appropriately, and then allocated according to the most appropriate metric. And there are a host of metrics, right? Passenger count, train miles, locomotive or car miles, just any way you can think of that's most appropriate to assign that cost. There are occasionally attempts to point out inconsistencies. The classic example is, gee, all of the red caps in Penn Station's costs, or the vast majority of them, I think they said all are assigned to long distance trains. Well, there may be 5% of the people who are going from New York to Washington or Boston who have a lot of baggage, but it's very unusual. And if that's wrong, the one thing it's not is material. Okay, I'm just about to get off this soapbox, but here are a couple of reasons to believe me. One is, even during my brief tenure as CEO, I had two different CFOs, both in the telecom industry. They looked through the entire system and said, this thing works, it's right. And just as importantly, Amtrak is an outside auditor, E&Y, which is one of accounting's big four firms. They annually verify all of Amtrak's financial statements. And if something were wrong or inappropriate there, they have every incentive not to go along with those statements. So how did all this shake out in 2019? Shifting gears. Well, long distance trains lost a total under this system of $523 million. The Northeast Corridor generated a profit of, I think, about $540 million. A profit under the Amtrak system, and the state-supported services, which include Virginia, lost $90 million, plus or minus. And that's really by design under PRIA. And the entire enterprise, and there's some other access businesses and things like that, lost less than $40 million, by the best year they've ever had. Why is that important? That's really important for Amtrak because in addition to those operating losses, they're capital expenditures. And what Amtrak does, and the way to think about it is a cash business, right? There's GAAP reporting, but it's best to think about it as a cash business. So every year, Amtrak takes all the revenues and then all of the state support, all of the infrastructure support from commuter agencies and the government funding that it receives, and it first runs the trains, and then everything else that's left goes into capital, goes into improvements. And they've become more and more efficient at spending capital. At the same time, the losses have gone down. And when they don't have the ability to spend everything on capital, that they like to, they accumulate funds for big projects. That's how they've been able to buy 75 new locomotives for state and long distance service. That's how they are now looking at replacing the corridor. The new Acellas are testing already, but replacing the regional train equipment and even some of the long distance equipment. These are huge things to do. Everybody's been on one of the trains and been on the Amfleet ones. They look better than they did a few years ago, but they're old, they're tired. It's long past time for their replacement. So that's how the whole system works. Now, people then who are advocating long distance say, well, yeah, Amtrak makes that money, but look, they spend all this money on capital on the corridor, and long distance doesn't have to spend that. Well, turns out they spend about the same, long distance mostly on equipment and just equipment refurbs and things like that. The corridor service is on that, but a lot of capital now comes from the state. So they spend roughly the same amount of capital. Why am I telling you all of this? Because there's a background noise about Amtrak that continues to go on. And what I'm trying to assure all of you is that it's in the best shape it's been in a long time. It has great plans for the future, and they're a great partner for Virginia and, in fact, for any of the states. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about this you'd like to ask. So let's talk about Virginia for a minute. I appreciate Secretary Valentine reminding me that I was at an event in 2009. I have trouble remembering events last week these days. But I know I have been with and around the Virginians for high-speed rail and around DRPT folks for a long time right now. And I have always, even in my Norfolk Southern days, held Virginia and the good folks in Virginia out as a model for the way to do business in terms of promoting and implementing passenger rail. In my freight days, I always would say there were 3 issues that had to be surmounted for us, Norfolk Southern, to say, yes, you can run passenger trains on our railroad. First and foremost, we had to address the liability issues. And for that reason, Amtrak, because of Amtrak legislation, that's taken care of. So that was easier. That's easy to do business. Second, we would model the infrastructure, and to the extent that implementing passenger train service caused freight train delay, there had to be capital and a plan to improve capacity to mitigate train delays, both for the freights and for the passengers. And then finally, there needed to be some form of payment for the use of the right-of-way, because we are a privately owned company, but we're owned by our shareholders. There needed to be some payback for that. And Virginia's transportation officials understood that from the start. And the result has been what I think is this remarkable blooming of passenger service, successful passenger service in the Commonwealth. In fact, successful to the point, and this has been mentioned earlier, that I want to say, I think it's still the case, it was when I was there, when the state subsidizes up to a level, any state, the above the rail operating costs that aren't covered by the ticket revenue. And in Virginia, we had trains almost unlike any other state that very quickly covered that cost. And it's a remarkable story. So I applaud and continue to applaud everyone in the Commonwealth for what's happened and what continues to go on. And now, with the new plan, with the construction of the new Potomac River Bridge, this buying the right-of-way and constructing a passenger main down to Richmond, and then the purchase from Doddswell over to Clifton Forge, and all of the opportunities it opens up, Virginia's poised to just go to greater and greater heights. I will tell you, when I first heard about it, I thought that's an audacious plan. I believe that it is. But I think with the implementation of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority and with the funding sources that have now been lined up, I think it's a plan that's thought out for success. And I am very excited to be part of it. By the way, the plan is really in perfect alignment with the vision of Amtrak management and my vision as well, as where passenger rail really needs to go in this country. And that is city pairs and a regional focus. I used to ride the train from Charlottesville to Washington in my Amtrak days, back and forth, the regional train. And I rode along with a whole lot of folks who, like me, just really didn't want to ever get on I-95 if they could help it. There are a lot of places in the country where that feeling exists. It's a really powerful vision, and Virginia has shown the success that can come with that vision. So I'll stop rambling here in a minute. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the post-COVID, post-election world. So let me deal with the post-election world. Well, Amtrak has a fan in the White House, very clearly. One of his campaign videos, I don't know if any of you saw it, really focused on an Amtrak conductor and talking about what a great human being Joe Biden is, and I think he is. My speculation is that Amtrak funding will increase. But let me say, it's important to realize that the anti-Amtrak sentiment, while it's occasionally voiced in Congress, has subsided enormously from the days of John Micah and people like that. And in fact, Amtrak appropriations in the past few years have been pretty healthy. There's been at least 1 year, maybe more, where we actually got more than we asked for initially, which just kind of took us all aback. I think the money to restore long distance service to a weekly basis, it will be coming and coming fairly soon. I think second, and maybe even equal importance, and I think this will be a bellwether, is that we'll start to see real funding and a plan come forward for Amtrak's Gateway project. For those of you who are not familiar with Gateway, it is actually a series of projects to put new tunnels, 2 new tunnels under the Hudson River between Newark and Manhattan, increase capacity to match those tunnels because the old tunnels, which were really compromised by Superstorm Sandy, are still the ones that we're using today, but match that capacity to get from Newark all the way into Penn Station, and ultimately to add some capacity in Penn Station, which is operating at train loads and passenger loads far beyond its design capacity. So that's the single most important Amtrak project. And I'm optimistic that we'll start to see it really move ahead now. I would say that beyond that, beyond those 2 things, there will be increased Amtrak funding, maybe some more on the equipment side. It's unclear to me that when you look at the elements of, I guess, what some of what falls under the Green New Deal, it's a great set of thoughts. It strikes me as having been in the railroad business a long time, that it would be extraordinarily expensive and very impractical. It's not something any of the freight railroads who actually own the property would welcome. And it's not that it might not happen, or some of it might not happen someday, but I just don't see it with the cost associated with it happening anytime soon. What about post-COVID? Well, Jack asked all the right questions. And I don't know the answers. None of us do. How comfortable will people be traveling in the future. I do think that there will be less business travel. There will be more people who say, I can handle this on a Zoom or WebEx or whatever the technology call is without having to get on principally an airline to go meet with somebody. There will be more people that work from home, for sure. I'm not sure that it's going to be an overwhelming number. And I think it will, what we're going to see is hybrid models, people that go to the office 2 or 3 days a week and then work from home for the balance of the week. But I'll say this, it's going to be interesting to watch these changes. They're going to have significant effects. But I think in terms of what we want to do here in Virginia, those effects are on the margin. There are still going to be a lot of people who want to travel who don't necessarily go by train today, and a lot of people who, if there is convenient, comfortable train travel, either from city to city or just to commute, there's a lot of appetite for that, because we've just really scratched the surface so far in terms of the potential for rail in the state. I think the future is very bright. Well, thanks for listening to me. Since we're on Zoom and YouTube, I'm going to just now relax and imagine some rapturous applause while Danny does whatever he needs to do to take questions. Danny, have I left any time for questions?
Yeah, I think you have. Danny, we'll go to you first. Wick, thank you so much for your candor, your insights, and what truly has been a lifetime of great achievement in rail transportation. And we deeply appreciate you. Danny, we've got a couple minutes. Do you have some questions? Danny, I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can.
While Danny's going on, I looked at the questions. I see 2 I can answer.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
2 from Rafi Goroyan. I apologize for the last name. Long distance service coming back to daily. Yes, I think so. The problem with long distance, right? There are a number of problems. One is it loses money. And by the way, for those of you who are interested in all of this subject of money and long distance, if you go to the reports section on the Amtrak website and go to frequent FAQs, frequently asked questions, and go to long distance, there's a great white paper which goes through all of this in length, and it's well worth your time. Yeah, Virginia, the problem with it, I think it's coming back to daily. The problem with it from the standpoint of what a lot of Virginians want to do is by the time northbound the train gets up here, it's usually late. It's not reliable, whereas the regionals are very reliable. And I think that's why there's a real opportunity for the second Roanoke train that's in the process of being agreed upon. And did I ever consider, hope, or look into arranging 611 to pull the Roanoke train? I assume most of you know what the 611 is. There was a lot of conversation about that, but it wasn't something that was going to be easy to do, and we didn't do it. And by the time we got to the Roanoke train, I think NS had stopped running it. So, okay, those are my 2. Lots for Jennifer up here.
And Jennifer had to jump off to a meeting. Jack and I are tag teaming, so I will close out. But I have one last question for you, Wick. Do you think that the partnership with Virginia and CSX that led to the big landmark deal, if that is successful, do you think Norfolk Southern or the other host railroads might follow suit in those type of capacity or right-of-way partnerships?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that I think Norfolk Southern and the state have been able to do good things already in terms of capacity. We certainly did as I think most of you know, in implementing the Roanoke train, right, with some, we certainly did with respect to VRE just south of Manassas. And I think there will always be a willingness to work together. I don't, Amtrak's, Norfolk Southern's freight volumes aren't as high as the RF&P coming into Northern Virginia. And there's a fair amount of double track all the way. So it's not clear to me at what point the modeling would ever say, gee, you need a third main track. It might say you need to restore some more double track. Whereas I think with the amount of service that's contemplated for Richmond and the amount of traffic that's on the RF&P, which is, I think, mostly, maybe all double track today, I think the third main is something that has to be done. I don't know that on NS that's anywhere close in terms of traffic density.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Wick, and congratulations on the Beatles UCrop Award, and for your service on the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. We look forward to working with you over the coming years and your work on that organization.
Thank you, Dan.
So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you to our sponsors as we wrap up this celebration, to our presenting sponsor, Dominion Energy, our gold sponsors, Jim and Bobby Ucrop, JBG Smith, Progress Rail and Caterpillar, Siemens, VRPI, and our silver sponsors, Sandy Duckworth and the Environmental Southern Law Center. We would not have been able to put this event on without their incredible support, especially having this been taking a year and a half to get this put together with the COVID and the impacts and having to move it several times. And so, Clay, next slide. And to everyone, thank you very much for participating in our first virtual anniversary celebrating event. I hope you enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And if you continue to send me any questions, I'll make sure to get those along to the speakers. And thank you all for supporting our organization over the last 25 years. It has been a tremendous honor to advocate on behalf of you and for better passenger rail. And we've made a significant difference, as you see on this slide, over the last 25 years. And so on behalf of Virginians for High-Speed Rail's Board of Directors, may you and your families keep rolling down the tracks into a healthy and happy holiday season and to a good new year. Good afternoon, and thank you all again for participating. And this will be online.